Hi, Cam McLellan here. Today I'm going to give you an understanding of the basics of duplication. I think this is very important for people to understand how to use the equity from one property to purchase the next property. I'm then going to talk about the time we've got over our lifetime to invest and why this determines the fact that we need to diversify and invest in multiple cities to fast track our portfolio growth or our net wealth growth. I'm not saying diversify for the sake of spreading risk across multiple cities. I'm talking about diversifying across multiple cities so that we're getting in at the start of the growth period and then moving to the next city to get in the start of the growth period, and how this fast tracks our portfolio growth. And then I'll talk to you about the fundamentals of how to assess each city market, because it's a lot of people don't understand. While they live in, say, a Melbourne or a Brisbane or Perth, whatever it may be, it's sometimes daunting to consider investing in another city which they may have visited, but they don't know the basic fundamentals or the ins and outs of that city. So I'll give you the basics on that. So first of all, we'll talk about the basics of duplication. One property to the next. If we look at one property, we look at the initial deposits and costs, and then we've got a loan for the rest of that property. We then wait and go through a growth cycle, so maybe 7 to 10 years to go through a growth cycle, getting growth hopefully earlier than that. But once we get some growth, we've still got our deposits and costs, which we've got there, but we've also got some additional equity. Now, equity can be utilised to purchase an additional property. I've only ever saved for one deposit in my lifetime. Back in the 90s, I sold my HQ Premier. I had a couple of grand extra, so it was about $7,000 I used for my first property deposit, and that's the only deposit I've ever saved for. The rest has come from equity growth. So once we've got the equity growth, we set up a line of credit loan. We then use that for deposits and costs of property 2, and so on. So we'll use the growth from our initial property for deposit costs to purchase an additional property. So that gives you a basics of duplication and how people duplicate using equity growth. I then want to talk to you about the time we have to invest in our lifetime. If we think about the majority of investors, if they're lucky, they may start at 25 years of age. Most people don't want to be investing actively past 55, or the concept of that may be hard to understand. I know I will be. But 25, really we've got 3 decades where we can build our wealth. That being the case, understanding a growth cycle takes 7 to 10 years, and needing that equity to buy the next property. If we buy property 1 the first time, we need to wait to get some equity, maybe buy the next couple of properties, and then so on. Over the journey, we're definitely going to build our portfolio, investing in a single city. But if we were to invest in the first capital city, get some growth, buy a couple more properties here, and so on, we're fast tracking or bringing in the time it takes to grow our portfolio. Then we need one more growth cycle, and the rules have changed. Then working becomes a choice, and the general rules of the population financially don't apply to you. So you can see the reason why it's very important to invest in capital cities across Australia. Now, I only invest in 4 capital cities. It's not to say the other capital cities aren't good for investment, but the reality is in the 4 major capital cities, so Perth, Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney, there's more than enough properties for myself to choose from to find a good investment at any point in time. And each of those cities cycle at different times, so I can always utilise the next city as far as its growth cycle. So comprehending the rationale of why we invest in different cities. When I think of it, I try to explain to my kids or to new investors, people coming where investing is new, and why this concept is sometimes daunting. I explain to them, it's like having a bag of lollies and having to put your hand in and find that one lolly that you like. If you think about the 4 major capital cities, there's a lot of property. It's very hard to go and pick that individual property out, that perfect property out of all of those houses on the market in those 4 capital cities. There's a lot of options. So how do we minimise it down to find that right property? I've developed a system I call MAP. So it's market, area, property. I first look at the market I want to invest in, then the area, and finally the property. So if we look at it as a target like this, so I might look at Perth, Sydney, Brisbane. So So I want to look at the markets, the area, and finally the property. So market, area, property. So looking at that concept, I just want to talk about understanding the fundamentals of a city market. It's not a matter of picking the best market at that point in time, because I've got good faith in those four capital cities that over a long period of time, they're all good to invest in. But how do I pick the best one at this point in time? I don't look for the best, I look to knock out the markets that aren't good to invest in at that point in time. How do I do that? Understanding that leading up to any boom period, developers on a large scale, so if I quickly talk about supply and demand, there's another link I'll supply, which is supply and demand understood, which is understanding the danger time when you should not invest in a market. But very quickly, if we look at demand and supply, at this point in time, when demand comes and meets supply, developers become active. At this point in time is a boom. This period here is 2 to 3 years. This period of time here, 2 to 3 years, is when developers become active. Developers on a large scale, when they start their developments, medium high-rise apartment developers, broad acre land subdividers, they'll be bringing stock to market during this period here, which is why you see a dip or a downturn in the market after every boom, because that's when the majority of developers are dumping stock onto the market. So really, what we want to determine is when we do not want to invest in a city market. So I look for 2 to 3 years of solid growth. So if we've had a couple of years of strong growth, 15% and above, I'll then look to another city market, because I know there's a good chance that I've missed out on that quick equity growth. I then want to position myself, so I'm getting in on the market at this point in time. So the first time we look for is 2 years of growth. So I generally pick about 15%. The other three key factors I look for are population forecast. Once again, I'm not looking for the best population forecast. The Australian Bureau of Statistics website, well, it's not a fun website to navigate. That's where you'll find the information. So I look for a market where the population forecast may be not as attractive as the other ones, and I knock that city out of the way. So I look for the growth, the population forecast. I think the population forecast is demand. It's what determines the demand in a city market. So if we've got a good population forecast, we know there's good demand continually coming into that city market. The opposite of demand is supply, so the title registrations that are in that market at that point in time. So if developers have large apartment blocks that have got, and I don't advocate buying apartments, don't get me wrong, but large apartment blocks that are built, titled, ready for occupation, or the developers on a large scale on the city fringes, now I'm not talking about way out in the bush, but in the city fringes or infill areas that have titled stock sitting there and they're offering major incentives to get you into those. If you know there's lots of titled stock around, you know there's an oversupply. If title registrations are pushing out 3, 6 or 9 months on a large scale, so not one developer, multiple developers, you know that there's an issue with supply in that city market. So I look for population growth and I match that against the title registration. So that is supply and demand. The final thing I usually look for is the employment rate. So people, when they feel comfortable in their job, they buy houses. So consumer confidence is a big driver. So affordable housing and a good employment rate, the population forecast being strong and limited titled stock. As long as you've got those 4 keys. So market, area, property, but just to understand the market and how to knock out the markets that I don't want to invest in, I'll look for a couple of years of growth period and stay away from cities that have had that. I'll look to knock out employment growth forecasts that aren't good, check the titled stock on a market, and finally look at the employment stats. So hopefully it gives you an understanding of the basics of duplication and how you can use that initial deposit to purchase multiple properties. Then, considering the time we take to invest over our lifetime, if we can shorten the growth period where it takes to grow our portfolio by investing across multiple cities, then we can fast track our future net wealth. And to do that, hopefully it gives you an understanding of the different city markets and how to really get yourself used to the city markets and the factors that drive long-term growth. So safe investing, guys.